for being here on what's turning into a lovely summer evening. I can't think of anything I'd rather do on a summer evening than talk about gerrymandering. So welcome. In the next hour, what I hope to do is introduce you to Fair Districts Pennsylvania, my organization, tell you a little bit about what we think is a fundamental flaw in our democracy and how it works, and how we propose that we, the people, change our democracy so that it works more like our founders intended. That's pretty simple. As you'll see, it's not all that simple. My name is Husick. I'm an attorney. I practice in Gerrymandering Township, and a little bit of history about me will be interspersed through the presentation, so you'll learn a little bit more about why I took on this crazy idea of gerrymandering. But first, a couple of introductions. This is Don. Don is a Democrat. I made Don up. Don lives in Philadelphia, and sadly, Don never votes in the general election in Philadelphia. Why? Because he thinks his vote doesn't count. You see, a Democrat always wins in Philadelphia. Now, this is Dina. Dina is a Democrat who lives in Chester County, and she lives in this district, the 6th. She votes religiously in every election, but she can't figure out how come, even though she and her neighbors are voting all the time, a Republican always wins in the 6th. She wonders why. And our last character in the play is Lawrence. Lawrence is that rarest of birds, a moderate Republican, or at least he used to be. Couldn't stand it anymore. And lives in, again, the 6th. And Lawrence knows that the 6th is a district that is safe-ar. That is, it's been constructed to be safe for Republican candidates. And I wondered, how is that? And how can we change that? How can we make elections competitive? Well, I grew up at a time when I understood that a bedrock principle of our democracy is that we have one person, one vote. And the problem here is that it doesn't matter whether you're a D or an R or an I or a Green Party, or a Martian for that matter, your vote doesn't count the same as everyone else's. And that's a problem. And that's a problem that we need to solve. Now, I grew up at a time when if you wanted to learn something about a subject, you came home after school, you turned on the TV, and what you watched was Schoolhouse Rock. And if it was good enough for me, it's good enough for you. So, we're going to watch a little bit of Schoolhouse Rock. Everybody got that? Pretty simple stuff. All we have to do is count the people, figure out where they live, and draw some lines. What could be easier? Not so fast. Not so fast because there is this little problem with politicians. You see, they say they care, but I have to ask, what about we the people? Here's your history lesson. This is what you would have learned in high school had you been paying attention. See, way back in the early part of the 19th century, there was a guy who was the governor of Massachusetts who had in fact been a signer of the Constitution, His name was Elbridge Gerry. And Elbridge Gerry belonged to one party, and that party was in danger of losing an election, so his people in the party figured out that they could redraw a district boundary. Now the paper in Boston said, wait a minute, that district boundary looks a lot like a salamander, and they termed that a gerrymander. We softened it up and we call it a gerrymander. And they did this in the early part of the 1800s. We have, for more than 240 years, been messing around redrawing lines on a map. And we do it for a lot of reasons. Why do we do it? Well, it turns out that the problem is that the same people who draw the lines on the map have a vested interest in staying in their elected offices and retaining power. And that means that they need to find a way to do that when the people don't necessarily agree with them. And we call that gerrymandering. Now, it's not like this is a new problem, but no less an authority than St. Ronald of Reagan told us back in 1991 that he thought that gerrymandered districts are grotesque, misshapen symbols of political chicanery. And he even told us how to fix this problem. He said that he believed that states should set up bipartisan citizen commissions to draw the lines rather than letting the politicians do it for themselves. Well, we didn't listen to Ronnie in '91, and we've hardly listened since. Why do politicians do this to us? Well, for a lot of reasons. First, politicians like to be able to choose their voters rather than the other way around. After all, it's good to be in power. As Mel Brooks said, it's good to be the king. Secondly, politicians don't necessarily want to have to deal with either powerful incumbents with whom they disagree or powerful and popular challengers. And drawing lines on a map lets them eliminate those. Politicians may not like to listen to a vocal minority, and so being able to draw the lines allows them to ignore those minorities. And lastly, politicians may not want to listen to a community that gets its act together. And so they may want to split up that community so that your voice won't be heard in the same way with the same force. That leads me to the question, why do we, the people, allow this to happen at all? Well, it comes out of our Constitution. You see, as the Schoolhouse Rock video told you, there are 435 seats in the House, and they get reapportioned every 10 years based on the census. Then, after the reapportionment, we have to redraw the lines because people move from state to state. And so we may have fewer representatives in Congress after the next census. That's what happens. Here in Pennsylvania, our congressional district map is drawn one way, and that is that the majority party in Harrisburg draws a map, sends it to the governor for signature, and that's that. For the districts for the state House and Senate, it's done a different way. And there, by our Constitution, the two leaders of the majority in the House and Senate and the minority of the House and Senate get together, and the four of those people then have to, within 45 days, pick a chairperson of this panel. So you've got 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and they've got to agree on that 5th person. And if they can't do it in 45 days, the state Supreme Court, by majority vote, chooses the chairperson, and then those 5 people draw all of the House and Senate districts for the Commonwealth for the next 10 years. That's what it says in the Constitution of Pennsylvania. And the Constitution also gives these people guidance on how to draw the lines. You see, it requires that all of the districts be compact, that is, small in area, small as possible, contiguous, they have to be joined together in some way, and nearly equal in population. Those are the basic rules. And then there are some guidelines for those rules, and those guidelines are that that unless it's absolutely necessary, you're not supposed to split up an existing political subdivision. A town, a borough, a city, a county, even a school district. You're just not supposed to split those things up, unless you absolutely have to. In areas where the population is very densely packed, you have to. In areas where the population is sparse, it's often not required. And so those are the rules. It seems like our legislators should be able to understand those rules, and yet we get districts that look like this, the Pennsylvania 7th. One of the most gerrymandered districts in the country. It is often referred to, squint real hard, as Goofy Kicking Donald. To me, it doesn't either look compact or contiguous, and it certainly divides counties, townships, boroughs, and so forth. It stretches across 4 different counties. Here in Phoenixville, we're in the 6th, which, although not quite as bizarrely shaped, is just as divisive. The 7th didn't always look like Goofy Kicking Donald. The 7th looked sort of rational for a long time. But over time, it has become more and more convoluted. And you can see the red arrow down there in the corner. In order to make the 7th contiguous, the legislators had to go through a little bit of a gymnastic act. You see, that little area where it's joined together, for those of you familiar with the area on Gulf Road, where it passes under the turnpike behind King of Prussia Mall, the only thing that makes it contiguous is roughly 100 yards of Pennsylvania Turnpike. That's it. No one lives there. That's the bridge. And, as if that weren't enough and you like to see other kinds of game playing, this is out in Wyomissing. It's the border between the 6th and the 7th. And a couple of poor helpless souls, they decided that they needed a couple more Republicans over there in the 7th. So they actually literally sliced out 1 house here and 4 houses here where the Republicans lived. So our politicians like to play games, and unfortunately for us, the voters, they're very good at it. Now, Mr. Kampf's district, we're standing in Mr. Kampf's district, was changed the last time around we drew the maps in 2012. And it encompasses 4 different political subdivisions, and not all of each. So there are pieces, bits and pieces patched together to make sure that Mr. Kampf gets elected every time. And Mr. Dinneman, our senator, now has a district that stretches from, well, up on 422, all the way north of here, all the way down past Oxford. It takes him an hour and 25 minutes to drive the length of his district. This isn't good for democracy, folks. And the result is predictable, predictably unfair. It is an effort to gain and hold power. In 2012, Democrats scored 50.5% of the votes for House representatives in Pennsylvania, and the prize, they took home 28% of the seats. A margin of 13-5 in favor of the Republicans who had drawn the map. The top map is the Republicans' map from 2012, and it represents a 13-5 win based on that 50.5% vote. The bottom map is one that I drew. I didn't change a single vote. All I did was move the lines on the map. And by moving the lines, I could have produced a 13-5 Democratic victory. Again, remember, it was nearly a 50-50 split in the vote. And when you can swing from 13-5 on one side to 13-5 on the other, you know that games are being played. So how do they play those games? Well, I have a hypothetical state to show you. And in this state, so that we don't bias things, there's a green party and a purple party. And the green party has 60% of the voters, and the purple party has 40%. And we are going to divide it into 5 districts. Now, there's a good way to do that. There's an easy way. We draw 5 straight lines, and just like we think it should be, 60% of the 60% of the Greens make it to office, 40% of the purples. Now, because the Greens are in the majority and they get to draw the lines on the map, they could draw the lines the other way. And if they do that, notice that the congressional delegation is now all Greens, no purples. Now here's the really interesting one. If the purples got to draw the map, the purples could play a really clever game, and by drawing slightly different lines, even though they're in the minority, 40 to 60, they could actually hold a 60-40 majority of the elected representatives. This is called gerrymandering, and the ways in which you break up or pack together certain voters is called packing and cracking, and that's what they do. Now, what changed? We used to have these nice contiguous compact districts. Why in 2012 did we get these crazy looking ones? Well, the answer to that is twofold. The first is computer mapping technology. If you use Google Maps or Waze in your car, you know what I'm talking about. And so if you can take that sophisticated computer mapping technology and mine data about the way that people vote, not the way that they cast their vote, that's secret, but things that indicate the way they might vote. And by the way, things like your education, your income, even what magazines you subscribe to, are indicators of your political affinity. It turns out that people who subscribe to Cat Fancy magazine are much more likely to be Republicans. Don't ask me why. And so if you take all of what's called proxy voter data and crank it into the computers and spend a lot of money on real smart people, you get these convoluted maps. And that's exactly what the Republican Party did in 2010 in a project that they called RedMap. RedMap was literally a project to turn the entire country's voting map red for Republican. What did the Democrats do? Well, they were asleep. They didn't notice this was going on, and as a result, we got these strange districts. There wasn't a fight. Now, how do we remember all of this stuff? Easy. Schoolhouse Rock. We have something called the Voting Rights Act, and districts are not allowed to be drawn based on racial criteria. The problem is that we have no similar rule for districts drawn to advantage one particular political party. That party-based gerrymandering is the source of what's going on here in Pennsylvania and in so many other places around this country. Now, if you think that this is all hypothetical, I got news for you. You see, Back in the early part of his political career, a pretty much unknown politician named Barack Obama got elected to the state legislature in Illinois. And it looked like he was going to run against Bobby Rush, a longtime Democratic congressman from Chicago's North Side. So what did the Democratic Party do to keep Mr. Obama from displacing Mr. Rush, who had been in Congress for 30 years? They drew his house right out of the district. They literally kidnapped him into a neighboring district so that he couldn't challenge. So this is not just a party versus party thing. This is also those who have power and those who want power. Where does it leave the people? Well, pretty much nowhere. So the question is, how do we know when a map is illegal based on its attempt to advantage one political party? This is a question the courts have tried to stay away from for many, many years. But there is a glimmer of hope, and here's what it is. There is a case which is now going to go before the Supreme Court this fall in 2017 called Whitford versus Gill. And in that case, which comes out of Wisconsin, a 3-judge federal court panel said that when the intent of those drawing the map is discriminatory on a party basis, when the map exhibits what they called a high and durable level of partisan asymmetry and what we call an efficiency gap, in other words, wasted votes, and when that asymmetry is unnecessary and not avoidable, the map is unconstitutional. So said 3 federal judges. Predictably, the Republican legislature of Wisconsin has appealed that, and the Supreme Court will hear the case this fall. That efficiency gap is a measure that the court can use. It's a numeric measure of just how gerrymandered a district is. Because the last time this issue went before the Supreme Court, it was a 5-4 decision that said, we can't touch this partisan stuff. And Justice Kennedy was the swing vote there, and he said, in his opinion, bring me a workable standard and we'll address it. The efficiency gap, we think, is that workable standard. Now, where does Pennsylvania stand on that standard? Well, there it is. Pennsylvania at 32% is the most efficiency gapped state in the country, the most politically gerrymandered state in the nation. Wisconsin is not nearly as bad, but they still exceed the permissible threshold which the authors of the standard set at 8%. Because it's unavoidable that some votes are going to be wasted. It's never going to be a perfect map. And in fact, there are mathematicians who have programmed supercomputers to draw these maps, and it's possible to draw well over 1 billion maps just in Pennsylvania alone. After all, we can decide which side of the line every person's house gets to sit on. Why does all this matter? Well, it matters because our politics is broken. If you make races non-competitive, if races are safe, if candidates can run time and time again and never have to worry about losing, then they only have to listen to the people on their side of the aisle, whether it's D's or R's. And they never have to listen to independents and third parties. And that devalues democracy to the extent that the map has, in fact, turned largely red over most of the country. The red is a mark of extreme partisanship in voting, so that each one of those red districts is more than 10% differential in voting, and the deep blue ones are more than 10% the other way. We are a polarized country. How polarized? Well, it used to be that most races in Congress were competitive. There was a choice. You had a choice to make. And today, after the last election, we are down to 72 competitive seats out of 435. Just 72. And the result of that, well, the Harvard study that just came out said that gerrymandering causes us to fail to solve our problems. that we get gridlock as the parties talk past each other rather than compromising with each other, and that this hurts our economy. This literally hurts our pocketbook, among other problems. Here in Pennsylvania, we can tell that this is a problem just by looking at the statistics. We have the highest number of races where incumbents run for re-election of anywhere in the country. 91.7% versus a U.S. average of 81. We have the largest number of incumbents who run without a primary challenge from their own party. And we have the highest number of races where the incumbent candidate runs completely unopposed. Any way you slice it, this is bad for democracy. And as a result, our elected representatives face a wide variety of challenges. The first is that they never have to look across the aisle for the challenge. Instead, they have to look to the extreme wings of their own parties for the challenge. They fear being primaried. We also attract a tremendous amount of outside money to all of our races, in particular in the primaries. So if you're sick of those terrible attack ads every time the primary season comes along, this is the reason. Our representatives have a lot of trouble representing diverse viewpoints, after all. If you're more worried about the extreme wing of your own party, how do you listen to viewpoints from across the aisle? You simply can't. And, as with Mr. Dinneman, these sprawling districts mean that we have to have more offices, more personnel, more expense, less time spent other than on the road. And that means that our representatives feel they can't do a good job representing us. So what do we have to look forward to? Well, in 1911, Pennsylvania had one of the largest delegations in Congress. We were a tremendously influential state. But if the projections hold, by the time of the next census, we'll be down again, and we'll be down to the point where we lose perhaps 2 more representatives in Congress. And we'll have to redraw those lines because of that. So if we don't fix this problem, what are we looking at? Well, I think we're looking at a train wreck. Why? Because the first rule of politics is the golden rule. And that is, do unto others before they do unto you. And so the Democrats now have something to counter REDMAP, which they call the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. It is chaired by former Attorney General Eric Holder, and they are raising money to do unto the Republicans, just like the Republicans did unto them. We can expect more legal challenges to be filed. We've heard about court cases that have invalidated maps this year. There will be more of those. We can expect more outside money in our politics, more attack ads. We can expect that after the next census, 3 people in a back room will determine the course of Pennsylvania politics for 10 or a dozen years. We can expect that there will not be bipartisan solutions to our problems, and we can expect voter disenfranchisement on a larger and larger scale. All if we don't do something. So the question is, can we do something? And my answer is yes. There are a few things we can do. The first is that we could have, as some other states do, a nonpartisan citizens commission that draws our maps rather than letting the elected legislators do it. After all, you wouldn't want somebody who worked for you doing her own performance reviews and giving herself a raise, but we let our legislatures do that. We could just use computers to draw the maps, and we could specifically exclude all of this voting proxy data. So just draw a map based on where people live and not how they're likely to vote. And our courts could recognize the efficiency gap standard as a control on the maps that are actually drawn. And all these things could happen. In Pennsylvania, we're making it happen at FairDistrictsPA. We're making it happen because there are presently 2 bills pending in Harrisburg. They are Senate Bill 22 and House Bill 722, and they're identical. Senate Bill 22 has 13 co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle out of 50 senators, and House Bill 722 has 95 co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle. More than a third of each house has signed on to co-sponsor these bills. And these bills establish a nonpartisan citizens commission which will draw the map. Now, because the map drawing is specified in the Pennsylvania Constitution, these are bills to amend the Pennsylvania Constitution. That's not easy. We'll get to that in a moment. On June 15th, the League of Women Voters and the Public Interest Law Center filed a lawsuit here in Pennsylvania in Commonwealth Court challenging the existing legislative maps on the basis that they violate the efficiency gap standard as applied to the Pennsylvania Constitution. And this is a case that will go in parallel with the Whitford versus Gill case at the Supreme Court. So we have that avenue here in Pennsylvania as well. And Fair Districts is working to build a grassroots effort to support reform here in the Commonwealth, and we're having great success with that. Now, as I said, amending the Constitution takes time. After the November election, I decided I had to get more involved in politics, and I looked around for something that would suit my interests and skills. And as my wife would tell you if she were here, one of my skills is that I have a very annoyingly long attention span. In other words, once I latch onto a problem, I never give up. Well, that's a good thing here, because to amend the Constitution, you have to pass the pair of bills that are presently in the legislature by July of next year. Then you have to come back again in the next session of the legislature and pass the same bills for a second time. And after you do that, then they go on to a referendum which goes on the general election ballot. It's at a minimum a 4-year political process. Name me anything else that takes 4 years in our system. It's very unusual. We think we can get there. With all of these co-sponsors, with all of our fellow citizens supporting it, we're confident. So people then ask me, okay, you sold me. We need to do this. Our vote should count the same as everyone else. Our legislators shouldn't be able to pick their own voters, so what do I do? Predictably, I had an answer. The first thing is network. Talk to your friends and neighbors who weren't able to be here tonight. Say the word gerrymandering out loud. It's not a dirty word. Encourage people to come and endorse our effort at Fair District PA. Secondly, educate. Get on social media. Go to community groups. Figure out how to invite me to come to some group that you're a member of. I'm easy. Invite me, I'll show up. If there's 10, if there's 100, I've spoken to rooms like this. I've gone to high school auditoriums all over eastern Pennsylvania where we've had as many as 650 people show up for a meeting like this. I'll be there, I promise. And advocate. Contact your state legislators and ask them to support and co-sponsor. Mr. Kampf is not a co-sponsor, Mr. Dinneman is. We have our work cut out for us with Warren Kampf. Write letters to the editor. There was an article in the Phoenixville paper this week. Encourage local and county governments to pass resolutions of support. We have coordinators all over the Commonwealth. This map will show you which counties in green either have passed or are working on passing resolutions of support for this legislation, for this constitutional change. The orange dots show you townships, cities, towns, and boroughs that have similarly passed resolutions of support. This is truly a grassroots movement. We have a resolutions kit. We have coordinators. Log on to the website, learn how you can help with that. The timeline that we face to be successful is pretty simple. If we can get the Constitution amended, then on April 1st of 2020, the federal government will start the census. By the end of the year, the results of the census will go to the president, we hope. So far, the director of the census in Washington has resigned. The deputy director resigned earlier. There are no new appointments that have been made by the White House, and we are, by most counts, behind on the budget. The House has said that they will only give 10% of the money that the Census Bureau says it needs to count us all. That's a train wreck coming down. By January 10th, 2021, the clerk of the House will call for reapportionment. By April 1st, 2021, the data on which reapportionment works will go to the states, and then the map drawing will begin. So as I said, this takes a long attention span. Now, citizens in other states have been successful in this effort. And as I said, neither of the major parties is innocent of this. And so, in California, a hugely blue state, they decided to do something about it. And there's nobody better to tell you what they did than the governor himself.
Here's some of the things that are more popular than Congress. Hemorrhoids, nickelback, traffic jams, cockroaches, root canals, colonoscopies, herpes, even herpes. They couldn't beat herpes in the polls. Gerrymandering has created an absurd reality. The politicians now pick their voters instead of the voters picking their politicians.
The hell with you.
You thought that every 2 years in November, you're going to the polls to pick your representative, right? Wrong,
You cold-blooded bastard.
in California, the system was rigged so bad that between 2002 and 2010, we held 265 congressional elections. Guess how many districts changed party names? Only one. Using gerrymandering, our politicians drew their district lines so safely that even while congressional approval ratings went sometimes down into the single digits, they couldn't lose. The former Soviet Politburo had more turnover than California colonies.
You really believe that you're inside a movie?
But we fixed it. We took the power of drawing the district lines away from the politicians and gave it back to the people where it belongs. And we have proven gerrymandering can be permanently terminated. Share this video if you think it's time to end gerrymandering in America and to make our politicians sane again.
I only differ with Arnold on one word. Again. Now our neighboring district, just that way a little bit, is the 7th. And you heard me refer to it as Goofy Kicking Donald. I prefer to think of it a little bit differently. I prefer to think of it as the Jerry Goose. Once you've seen that, there's no unseeing it. But it tells you that this is no laughing matter, that there is a problem, that we can solve it, that we, the people, can be heard on this. The only thing that we've got to do is easy. We have to wrest power away from the incumbent politicians in Harrisburg. And all of you should be interested in doing that, and I look forward to your help, and I look forward to your questions, and I thank you for turning out tonight. Yes, ma'am. It doesn't help him, but it helps those who believe that the voters should have a choice.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Why is Mr. Dinman a co-sponsor of something that won't help him be reelected? And I think the answer is he's a good guy who understands this. After all, he used to be a history teacher. And he understands that this is fundamentally a corrupt practice regardless of which party does it and who benefits. Well, I'm not sure. He's still got to go to Harrisburg, so that's a long trip. But that's why. But there are plenty of other politicians who benefit from the present map who aren't on board. Yes?
I just didn't understand us moving to congressional districts. Isn't it still another thing like Congress that they can only have a certain amount? You can't
Yes.
use it.
Okay, so why will we lose 2 congressional representatives in 2020? The answer is very simple. People move out of Pennsylvania and they move to places where it's warm and sunny. So Arizona and California and Texas and let's see, Georgia and Florida, they gain consistently. Rust Belt loses consistently. So the question is, do we lose enough population to just lose 1 representative, or do we tip over the line into 2? Best betting odds are that we lose 2 of our representatives from the state, and we'll have to redraw all the lines. So it's a reduction in population as they move to other states.
But so gerrymandering is the problem.
Well, no, because gerrymandering is how you divide up what's left,
Oh,
okay, within each state. Just within each state, yes. Yes, ma'am.
This is a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Do it everywhere. My question is, I missed the efficiency gap explanation. Could you tell me what that is?
Okay, so the efficiency gap is a mathematical measure which attempts to capture how many votes are wasted by cracking and packing. Cracking means that if you have a concentrated group of voters, you try to divide them up among several districts so that what would have been a majority becomes an insignificant minority. And all of those votes are then wasted because they've been moved into safe districts for the other party. Packing is where you already know that there's a concentrated group in one area, and what you'd like to do is capture the areas around that one, so you take all of the people who you think will vote the same way as that concentrated group, and you pack them in so that instead of winning by 51%, they now win by 58%. Those extra votes are in turn wasted, whereas they might have had an effect had they remained in the original district. And when you measure the wasted votes, both by cracking and packing, you come up with this efficiency gap measure, which is a percentage figure. And what the scholars have said is up to about 8% is kind of the acceptable norm of the fact that people don't live sort of RD, 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 you know, boy, girl, all the way along every street, that people are clumped together, that people don't have the smoothest distribution, but that beyond that 8%, that's evidence that somebody is playing games like on Wissinoming Avenue, where they literally do the sawtooth and cut out 1 house here, 4 houses there, that what they're trying to do is affect the outcome. And if you can prove that, then that should allow a court to say this was done for nefarious reasons. That's the efficiency gap.
Isn't that what happened? It could be what happened with Winterman. This is so long that it's all packed in the press.
There are lots of examples, yes. The question is, isn't Dinniman's existing district that? There are examples that go both ways. And you have only to look at the districts around Philadelphia to understand how these line drawing games are played, because the district that covers Montgomery and Bucks and the district to our west that covers Lancaster and part of Berks, those have crazy lines too. And every time you see a line that doesn't fall along a township line or a school district line, you have to ask yourself, what were these guys doing? What information were they using? Because the default in our Constitution says that they should have respected those existing political lines. They didn't, so the question is why. Okay? Yes, sir?
Do you think that open primaries would understand gerrymandering, but in order for the ignorant voter or the one that just goes in and says, I'm straight party votes are big, is a waste of vote, a stupid vote in my opinion. Do you think that if we had an open thing, that would alter these districts? Or
So the question is,
work?
would open primaries change this result? And the answer is that open primaries don't affect the results of gerrymandering. Open primaries change who the candidates might be, but they don't change the party distribution in the general election, because the gerrymandering is drawn for precisely that reason. So yes, you get independents and third-party registrants who can vote in the primary, which we can't do today. We're disenfranchised at the primary level, but it doesn't change the vote in the general election one little bit. So it solves a different problem, that of disenfranchisement in the primaries. But the argument there is the parties run the primaries. If you're not registered in a party, you don't get to come and play in the primary. And that's a pretty powerful argument on the part of the parties to maintain the closed primaries today. Yes, sir, blue shirt.
If you were to take this away from the
I'm sorry. Hang on 1 second. We'll get there. Bright blue shirt.
purple.
Purple. Okay.
Other contemporary democracies have legislatures that are representative of regions, departments, and constituents within those entities. How is it that in the United States of America, since 1812, we have this practice of packing and cracking, and it has been able to continue until now at both the national, i.e. the House of Representatives, and in the case of Pennsylvania, both the Senate and House of Representatives at the state level.
So why is it that we are unique in this wonderful practice of gerrymandering in the world? And the answer is that it comes from the fact that we are the United States of America, and that therefore we organized on the basis of state boundaries, and then we set up what are called single-member districts within each state and gave the states the power to figure out the boundaries of those districts. In other systems, notably parliamentary systems, they are single-member districts where the boundaries encompass the entirety of the country. And so you might move a line a little bit, but in moving that line, you don't create the same kind of advantage, because in a parliamentary system, every vote counts the same as every other vote, and it's much more fluid. Now, there are alternatives. The Constitution doesn't specify that the representatives come from single-member districts. We could, in fact, change to a multi-member district system, which involves having a bunch of representatives for the whole state, voting for them, picking off the top number in the election, having runoffs, and so forth. We could do that. Congress could simply pass a law and say, we're blowing the whistle, everybody out of the pool, we're going to redo it for the next election in a different way. That would eliminate the problem of gerrymandering. The difficulty is that it introduces lots of other problems, because multi-member districts are well suited to parliamentary systems and very ill suited to two-party systems. So as long as we have a two-party system with lock-on power at the national level, the problems you create with multi-member districts are just almost insoluble. Sorry. Yes, sir.
Yeah, if you were to take the politicians out, from the district maps, say computerized it, would it necessarily be the same shape, per se? Should it not be the same shape everywhere in the country, as long as there are 435 districts?
So the question is, if you just handed this to a computer, would the district shapes all be the same, because you just apply the same algorithm to the whole country? And the answer is no, for a lot of reasons. The first reason being that states are not all the same shape, and that population densities are not uniform across the country. Secondly, that the Voting Rights Act under our Constitution requires that we establish some districts that are called majority-minority districts. That is, historically, we've had a problem in that minorities were underrepresented and could never get their people represented in Congress. And so we fixed that by putting a thumb on the scale of how we draw the map with respect to race and race only. So you distort the map in that way. And then beyond that, as I said, you can program a supercomputer to just base it on population and draw the maps, and I can draw you 1 billion valid maps just for Pennsylvania. And you have to make some decision. It's always going to be a value judgment on the part of people who look at the Constitution and say, as close as we can get to being compact and contiguous and equal in population, then the question is, we've got to engage in some moving of the lines to account for where the boundary of a township is, where the boundary of a county is, where the boundary of a school system is, in order to maintain those communities of interest together so that they're voting on the same people and the same issues. At the end of the day, I'm afraid it's always going to be a person making those last fine decisions. And the question is, how do they balance all of the competing interests? And can they do it in a way without taking party affiliation into account? It's just the way it's going to be. Yes, ma'am.
I just was wondering, could it possibly be a help that we not allow our politicians to make a career out of this? By being in there maybe from 25 years old and dying in office at 90. Is there something that we can do about that?
So,
I think that that might be helpful. I mean, that might help change in some aspects.
so the question, I think, boils down to, would term limits help?
I think
Right?
that would be excellent.
This is what I refer to as the baseball solution. Throw the bums at it. I will tell you that I have been studying this a long time, and I don't believe that artificial term limits, regardless of where you set them, solve the problem. I'll tell you what does solve the problem. Voting for somebody else. We have that power, and even with the gerrymandering, it's possible to go door to door and say to your neighbors, this guy's been doing the same thing for 40 years. It's time that we get somebody else, because the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. So hey, let's not do the same thing. Let's vote for some new blood. It's possible to do that. I think simply having the power to vote is the core solution in our democracy. Because ultimately, if you have term limits, what you end up doing is throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Because I know some people who have been in office a good long time, who I would love to keep them doing exactly the same thing, even though they've made a career of it. Because they're doing the right thing for our country, they're doing the right thing for our Commonwealth. It would be a shame to take their knowledge and experience and say arbitrarily, oh, you've done this for 3 times, now you can't run anymore. Now, there are lots of places that have done that. But what they find out is that you build a party system where the party builds a conveyor belt to replace those people, and all they do is they get a clone to step into the same seat the next time over. And so it actually strengthens gerrymandering when you have term limits, because the parties draw the maps much more carefully in order to assure that they win when the guy who's term limited is out there. It's counterintuitive, but it's the way that the real world works. Yes, ma'am.
One thing I want to say is I see a lot of
Yes? Okay, so the comment is, she would like me to assure her that I'm reaching out to younger people because, well, we're all a certain age in this room. And the answer is yes, I'm going into high schools and talking to civics classes and world affairs clubs, because even the kids who are 15, remember I said it's a 5-year process, they are going to be voting by the time this thing gets to the end. So yes, I'm going into the high schools.
getting to prepare because a lot of people have they've given up. They just don't see their road count. And getting young people involved with this and getting them to the polls is a challenge.
Absolutely. We have a tremendous problem in our democracy today. That problem is best exemplified by the fact that the leading vote getter in last year's presidential election was no vote at all. More people failed to vote than voted for both of the leading candidates put together. And that is a tremendous problem in our democracy. It comes because, as you said, people feel that their vote doesn't count anymore. This is a way to change that. All the way back, yes.
So, as a first-time voter, and let's say this thing doesn't work out, what can young people do in the future to make sure gerrymandering ends?
So taking the pessimistic viewpoint that we don't get this change made, well, one answer to that is to make this an issue every time you go to the polls. So if you've got someone running who didn't co-sponsor this legislation and vote for it when it came up, make that an issue and get rid of that person and explain that that's why that person is losing a job. That's a great way to do it. Another way to handle this is run for the offices yourself. Right? In Tredyffrin Township, we have somebody who just graduated from Villanova who is running for school board. So she graduated from Conestoga High School 4 years ago, and she is running for a seat on the school board. I would love to see more young people get involved at that level, sit on township boards and commissions. It doesn't take a huge amount of time. That kind of grassroots involvement is missing, and it's what lets big money control our politics. Because ultimately, if you are involved, you know when they're lying to you on those 30-second ads on TV. You know when people are unfairly exploiting other people. That's what it takes. We have a democracy for a reason. As Mr. Franklin said after the Constitution was ratified, and he was asked what kind of government we had, he said, "A republic if you can keep it." That's an injunction to all of us. If we can keep it. After more than 200 years of letting the politicians draw the maps and protect their own jobs, it's time to change. I look forward to your joining me on this journey. Thank you so much.